Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to add two rational expressions together, or subtract two rational expressions. It's actually the same process. So, looking at these two rational expressions, one of the things I want you to notice is that the first guy, we've got a numerator, a denominator, and the second guy, we've got a numerator, a denominator. So really, the process that we're going to be using is similar to what we would use to add two fractions together. So if we're adding two fractions together or subtracting two fractions, we need to have a common denominator. So our first step here is we got to figure out what our denominators are made out of. And what I'm talking about is what factors make up our denominators. So our first step is we are going to factor those denominators. Now, if you don't remember how to factor trinomials like 4x squared minus 3x minus 27, I would encourage you to go back and watch the video about factoring and then come back to this video. So if I were factoring this guy out, well, what we would end up with ultimately is 4x plus 9 times x minus 3. And again, I'm not showing my work here just to save time. So if I look at the second denominator, that guy, 4x squared plus 25x plus 36, that guy factors into 4x plus 9 times x plus 4. So that means my first fraction is really going to be 3 over, and I'm going to rewrite the bottom in factored form. So it's 3 over 4x plus 9 times x minus 3. The second fraction originally was 1 over that whole expression, but the 4x squared plus 25x plus 36 factored into 4x plus 9 times x plus 4. Okay, we're done with step 1. Step 2 is I need to find that least common denominator. Or another way to state it is I need to find a least common multiple of both of my denominators. So when I look at my denominators, the first one is 4x plus 9 times x minus 3. The second one is 4x plus 9 times x plus 4. Well, any multiple of the first fraction is going to have 4x plus 9 in it. It's going to have x minus 3 in it, and then it can be times anything else. So as long as my expression has these two factors, it's going to be a multiple of that first denominator. Same thing for the second one. If I look at the multiples of the second denominator, well, for sure, the multiple has to have 4x plus 9 and x plus 4 in it, and it could have anything else in it, but it does have to include those two factors. So when I'm finding a least common multiple, I want to include all of my factors that I see, and I want to include the highest power of each individual factor that I see. So if we do that, I see 4x plus 9, and notice I've got a 4x plus 9 over here as well. So my least common multiple definitely has to include a 4x plus 9 factor. And the highest power that I see, well, I've got 4x plus 9 to the first, and I've got 4x plus 9 to the first. So my highest power of 4x plus 9 is to the first power. Okay, my least common multiple also has to include an x minus 3 factor. Otherwise, my common multiple won't be a multiple of this first guy. So this is supposed to be a multiple of both of my denominators. So it has to include the 4x plus 9, it has to include the x minus 3, it also has to include the x plus 4, otherwise it won't be a multiple of the second denominator. So my least common multiple is it has to have a 4x plus 9, an x minus 3, and an x plus 4 in it. Once we know what the least common denominator is going to be, our next step is going to be to get that common denominator for each fraction. So if we look at the first fraction, you'll notice that in the denominator we've already got the 4x plus 9 and the x minus 3 factor. But if we look at the least common denominator, we also have to have an x plus 4 factor. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom of that original fraction by x plus 4. When we look at the second fraction, you'll notice that on the bottom we've got the 4x plus 9 and we have the x plus 4 factors. But when we look at the least common denominator, what we're missing, it's got the 4x plus 9 and the x plus 4, but what we're missing is this x minus 3 factor. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom of the second fraction by x minus 3. And again, the reason why I'm multiplying top and bottom is because I don't want to change the value of the original fraction. So this is sort of like when I take 1/2 and multiply the top and bottom by 3, I end up with 3 over 6. But 3 over 6 is really the same as 1 over 2. So it's just written a little differently. So I'm doing the same thing here. I'm trying to preserve the value of the original fraction. So whatever I multiply the bottom by, I have to do the top by the same thing. Alright, so our final step then, so we'll call this step 3, is we want to combine our two fractions into one fraction. So when we look at combining our two fractions into one fraction, now that we have a common denominator, whenever I add two fractions together with a common denominator, the denominator just stays whatever the common denominator is. So my denominator is going to be 4x plus 9 times x minus 3 times x plus 4. And again, it doesn't matter what order I put the factors in the bottom, I just have to make sure all the factors are there. On the top, well, if I'm adding two fractions together, the top of my first fraction is going to be 3 times x plus 4, and then I'm adding that with the second fraction, which is 1 times x minus 3. Okay, so final step then is I want to distribute the top out and then combine like terms, and then we'll see where we're at after that. So if we distribute the first guy, we'll end up with 3x plus 12. If I distribute the 1 through the second guy, I'll end up with 1x minus 3, and then my bottom of course just stays the same. So I've got 4x plus 9 times x minus 3 times x plus 4. So now when I combine like terms, I'm left with, well, if I combine my x's, I've got 3x and 1x is 4x, and then I've got this 12 here, and this minus 3 is plus 9. And then in the bottom I've got 4x plus 9 times x minus 3 times x plus 4. So the final step is we want to try to simplify what we have. So one of the things that you'll notice is that the top and the bottom both contain this 4x plus 9 factor. So just like when I have a fraction, if my fraction contains the same factor on the top and on the bottom, I can divide top and bottom by whatever that common factor is to reduce the fraction. So here what we're going to do is divide top and bottom of the fraction by 4x plus 9. If I do that, 4x plus 9 divided by 4x plus 9 is just 1. And then I have to do the same thing on the bottom, so 4x plus 9 divided by 4x plus 9 is 1. So what I'm left with, my final answer, is going to be 1 over, and on the bottom I just have x minus 3 times x plus 4.